I'm not really a huge comic book person. In fact, if you look at my shelf, you'll find that a big percentage of the books I have are written by the same author, Alan Moore. The V for Vendetta mask is particularly meaningful to me. It shows up in my novel Chowderhat as a symbol of the counterculture, but also as a reminder of the uncomfortable relationship between art and capitalism. So I started poking around trying to figure out what else Alan Moore had written, and I found out that he'd actually published a few novels. A normal person might go for one of his shorter books, see if they liked his writing style. Not me. I dove right into his 1,300-page 2016 novel, Jerusalem. Now, this is the box set. I know this looks like 3 books. This is one novel. You have to read it all for it to make sense. Are you going to like it? I can't tell you that. I don't know you. But what I can do is give you a brief synopsis without spoilers of each book so you can get the encouragement you need to keep going when maybe things get tough, and then give you an overview of my reaction to the book and some of its themes. Now, what's Jerusalem about? It's hard to say. The back cover sort of gives you a lot of ideas about William Blake and Samuel Beckett, sort of allusions to different authors. It says it's an opulent mythology for those without a pot to piss in. It sounds like the type of thing I would like. So I started reading the first book, The Burrows. I'm going to call these books, they're volumes. Like I said, this is one big novel with 3 different volumes in it. The Burrows begins by introducing you to 2 siblings, Mick and Alma Warren. Alma is an artist. She's pretty successful. She's a big, terrifying person, sort of a celebrity in her hometown of Northampton, England. I think that Alma is a pretty obvious stand-in for Alan Moore himself. Her brother Mick is a laborer, and a recent industrial accident has triggered some repressed memories from his childhood. The first chapter of this book ends with Alma promising Mick that she's going to do an art show based on these memories that is going to save the town of Northampton itself. From there, this book becomes, I don't even want to call them stories. It's like a bunch of slices of life from Northampton over the past 1,200 years. You meet the priest who originally carried a cross from the Holy Land, planted it in Northampton, as well as a lot of Mick and Alma's friends, their ancestors, and even ghosts that travel among this town. About halfway through this book, I did start to get a little bit frustrated. I was like, is this it? Like, is it going to be just a bunch of short stories in and around Northampton, England? So I flipped forward into the 3rd volume. I saw some repeated names, some different writing styles. I said, okay, this is going to keep coming together. And that gave me the energy that I needed, or the encouragement I needed to keep plugging on. One thing that I'm going to tell you about this book is at the end of each chapter, write down just like 2 sentences about what happened in that chapter, because some of these things will come back and be recontextualized in the 3rd volume. And it was so much easier to be able to flip back, look at my marginalia, say, oh yeah, that was the song that Audrey was singing, or that was the car that Marla got into. So I could sort of start to piece this thing together as I worked through its pages. So I was pretty excited when I got through book 1. I mean, Moore can absolutely write. His writing style is just this opulent, gorgeous thing. You can tell that he loves his subject matter, he loves his hometown, and he wants to tell its stories. The second book is called Mansoul. Mansoul is his term for the afterlife. And before you pick it up, do this. Look into the corner of whatever room you're in. It's just 3 lines coming together. And because of your lived experience and maybe the shadows around it, you know that you are looking up into a corner that is poking away from you. But just for imagine, try to look at that corner and imagine that actually you're looking down at a cube that is poking at you. It takes a little bit of practice, but after a while you'll get it. Now the entire book here, book 2, takes place during the 10 or 15 minutes when a young Mick Warren chokes on a cough drop. And as this child is dying, he looks up at that corner and he sees another child up there beckoning him, calling him up into the afterlife. He follows his child, meets this gang of childlike ghosts. I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but these kids, if you've read like Chums of Chance and Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, or like the Boxcar Kids, any of those like lovable gangs of orphans, he follows them on their adventures across the afterlife. And Moore's conception of the afterlife is absolutely dizzying. It is a place that exists in multiple layers above Northampton. And so because they are outside of time, they can crawl through time, they can meet the people that made this town famous, people like Oliver Cromwell. He meets the demons, he meets the builders that decide people's fates. And he goes on this tour in and around the afterlife that will absolutely blow you away. And this book comes to a close, this act of the novel comes to a close with these kids going on a wild adventure to try to restore history to its proper place after you've been introduced to all these different layers of the afterlife. Which leads you to book 3, which was my personal favorite. I mean, because of the writing styles, you're going to love, I guarantee you're going to love one of these books more than the others. I really love book 3 because if the first book was a selection of stories from the history of Northampton, meeting all these different characters, book 3 was a celebration of the English language. Almost every chapter is written in a different writing style. The first chapter was one of my personal favorites. It's almost written from the perspective of God or time. It's this giant mythological thing talking about the wheels of time and where they grind forward into the future. You also have chapters written in verse. You have a chapter written as a drama, and people like Samuel Beckett show up in this chapter to sort of lend their 2 cents to the proceedings. You have a chapter written in a hard-boiled, like Mickey Spillane, tough guy, private eye kind of speak. And you also have a chapter written in the style of like a James Joyce or maybe even like a Lewis Carroll that's written about Lucia Joyce, who was in an asylum in Northampton for many years of her life. I was really excited about this chapter. I learned about Lucia Joyce in Shakespeare and Company. This was Sylvia Beach's book. And I worked Lucia into my own book, Mary Monster. She's mistaken for a time-traveling Mary Shelley, the novelist Mary Shelley. They sort of look kind of similar. So I thought that would be a fun aside. I thought it would be just really exciting to read more about her. The Lucia Joyce chapter is probably one of the most difficult chapters in the book. It is written in that style of James Joyce, and this is like Finnegan's Wake level James Joyce, where every single sentence just explodes in 4 or 5 different directions based on the different puns, the different accents, the different meanings of different words. I really liked working through it. There were times when I was just like deep reading every single page and just trying to figure out all the different puzzles that Moore was laying out with the English language. And there were other times when I just started to get tired. And I was like, I can't do this. It is too hard. I'm going to get through a few pages, pick up 30% of what he's laying down, and I'm just going to have to be happy with that. And that kind of leads me into my overall review of the book. One of my favorite sayings is that your greatest strength might also be your greatest weakness. And I think that's definitely true of Jerusalem. For one thing, the description in this book is just so rich. If you walk up a stairway with Alan Moore, he is going to describe how many stairs there are, what they're made of, what the stair railing feels like, the temperature of the stairwell, what kind of wallpaper you're looking at, how much light is coming in, what's the smell in the stairwell. And there were times when I was just like so entranced by this world and really putting in the work to try to figure out every single detail. And there were other times where I just didn't have it. And I was like, listen, if everything is important, nothing is important. Like, where is this plot going? Similarly, the historical asides, sometimes they were just like these beautiful, interesting things, and other times more based on my own opinion going into them. It's like, listen, if I wanted to read an encyclopedia, I would read an encyclopedia. Like, where is this going? And I like maximalist literature, the David Foster Wallaces of the world. Some of the different writing styles, it felt maximalist, and some of it just felt like brainstorming. Like Moore was saying, like, how much can I possibly put into this book? And it's not like he's unaware of this. There are a lot of meta comments throughout the book that sort of tease the reader, pull them through, try to make them understand why Moore is doing this. Early on, so there's a crack about, don't you hate it when you think you've picked up a pot boiler only to find out you're in the middle of somebody's magnum opus? And I was kind of like, yeah, like here we are. Even more telling, at Alma's art show, the climactic art show at the end of the book, the one that's been teased from the very beginning, she asks her brother if there's any chance that all this obvious effort only exists to disguise the fact that she has nothing to say. And that really stopped me. I really started to think, like, why are you putting that in here? But Moore does have something to say, and that's what he's trying to get across to you. I feel like This was his celebration of history. It is his celebration of language. It is his celebration of his hometown. And he wanted to create a book where if you took a nuclear bomb and just wiped Europe off the map, wiped England off the map, it would all be in here. All the history, all the grimy parts, all the glorious parts, all the different literary styles, all the moments that made his town what it is, everything is here. If you watch my video on William Vollmann's The Dying Grass, I asked the question, how do we decide which cultures live, which cultures die, and which cultures die but their stories live on and are told through the generations? And this feels like an attempt to make sure that Northampton stories live on forever.